You would think he lost you because you became distant, colder, quieter, harder to reach. But that's not the truth, is it? He didn't lose you because you changed. He lost you because you awakened. At first, it was subtle, almost invisible. The kind of shift no one can quite name, but everyone can feel. It was the sound of your intuition rising from the depths where it had been silenced for years. It was the woman you buried, the wild, intuitive, radiant one, returning home after a long exile. You began to see what you once refused to look at. You began to notice the manipulation disguised as affection, the control hidden beneath charm, the way his validation was the leash that kept your spirit small. Carl Jung once wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That was you, wasn't it? Living a fate you didn't choose, believing love was supposed to feel like walking on glass for the sake of being chosen. But awakening changes everything. It pulls you out of the fog of your projections, out of the fantasy you built around a man who was never ready to meet the depth of your soul. He didn't lose the woman he once knew. He lost the illusion that kept him comfortable. Because when a woman awakens, she no longer dances in the drama of his unhealed wounds. She no longer mirrors his ego back to him. She begins to see him, and herself, with a clarity that terrifies. There was a time when you mistook his chaos for passion, his silence for mystery, his distance for strength. You thought that loving him harder might save him from himself. But that was the shadow, the ancient pattern that made you believe love was sacrifice. You didn't see that every time you saved him, you betrayed yourself. Awakening dismantles that. It burns through the archetype of the savior, the caretaker, the pleaser. It leaves nothing but truth, and truth is rarely gentle. It breaks your illusions first, then your attachment, and finally, your desire to be understood by someone who was never meant to understand you. He didn't lose you because you became different. He lost you because you finally saw. You saw the games that once pulled you in. You saw the power dynamic that made you shrink. You saw how much of your worth you had outsourced to his approval. And once a woman sees herself clearly, she cannot return to blindness. This is the moment Jung called individuation, the sacred separation from the unconscious patterns that once defined you. It's when a woman stops being the reflection of a man's desires and becomes the embodiment of her own essence. And it's the most terrifying thing for a man who has only loved a woman he could control. Because the awakened woman is calm. Not the calm of indifference, but the calm of inner knowing. Her silence is not absence, it's presence. It says, I no longer need to prove my worth through your attention. And that silence drives him mad. Because it mirrors his own emptiness back at him, the void he tried to fill with conquest, admiration, or dominance. He will call you distant. He will call you cold. But he doesn't understand that you've simply stopped feeding his shadow. You've stopped giving energy to the performance. You are no longer the audience for his unhealed boyhood. In the language of Jung, this is when the anima, the feminine soul, withdraws her projection. It's when a man loses the dream he projected onto a woman and must face the barren landscape of his own psyche. That's why your awakening feels like his loss. He was never in love with you, he was in love with the mirror you held. And when you put that mirror down, he saw himself, truly, for the first time. That's what he can't forgive. Because he didn't just lose you. He lost the illusion that he was whole. And yet, that's the paradox of awakening. It isn't personal. It isn't revenge. It's simply the natural unfolding of consciousness. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you awaken, you cannot go back to sleep. There's grief in that, yes. The kind of grief that feels like death. The death of the woman who once believed love meant endurance. The death of the identity that revolved around being chosen. But what is born in her place is something eternal, something fierce and unshakably peaceful. So no, he didn't lose you because you changed. He lost you because you became who you were always meant to be. When a woman awakens, she becomes a mirror, not the soft, forgiving kind, but the one that reflects everything as it truly is. And that reflection terrifies the man who has built his worth on illusions. He looks into her eyes and no longer sees the adoration that once confirmed his dominance. Instead, he sees his own unhealed wounds staring back. The arrogance, the need for control, the fear of vulnerability, all of it rises to the surface. Because an awakened woman doesn't soothe his ego, she confronts it with the quiet power of truth. Carl Jung called this confrontation the meeting with the shadow, the hidden part of the psyche that holds everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. When you stopped trying to fix him, when you no longer absorbed his moods or explained away his cruelty, you forced him to face that shadow. But few men are ready to meet it. Most will run from it, and from the woman who holds it up to them. They run not because she is too much, but because she is too real. And yet, this awakening was never about him. It was the sacred initiation of your own psyche, a journey from unconscious giving to conscious being. For years, you mistook emotional labor for love. You poured yourself out like water into vessels that never held you. But water, when still and undisturbed, reflects the sky. It remembers its nature. That's what happened when you stopped chasing. You remembered who you were before the world told you to earn affection. The feminine in her awakened state does not demand or beg. She radiates. Her energy is no longer transactional, it's magnetic. She doesn't ask to be seen, she is seen, by virtue of her presence. This presence unsettles the unhealed masculine because it cannot be possessed. It doesn't play by the rules of seduction or manipulation. It simply is. And for the man still ruled by ego, that kind of woman feels like both temptation and threat. In the archetypal language of Jung, she embodies the Sophia, the wise feminine, the inner guide that brings light to the unconscious. Her energy dismantles illusions without violence. She exposes falsehood through calm observation, not accusation. This is what makes her power so quietly devastating. When she sees through him, she doesn't scream, she simply stops participating in the performance. Her withdrawal is the loudest silence he will ever hear. But awakening also comes with its own loneliness. The more conscious you become, the fewer people can meet you there. You start noticing how shallow conversations once sustained you, how chaos once felt like connection. There's a grief that lives inside awakening, the loss of comfort, the death of fantasy. Because to awaken is to see not only his shadow but your own. You begin to realize that your attraction to him was not random, it was a mirror of your own wounds. You were drawn to his coldness because it echoed the distance you carried within. You loved his mystery because you were afraid of your own truth. You tolerated his inconsistency because you were still learning that stability is not earned through suffering. Every projection he carried was also yours, and awakening is the process of reclaiming them. That's what Jung meant by integration. It's not about rejecting the darkness, but inviting it into awareness. The anger, the jealousy, the need to be chosen, these are not your enemies, they are your teachers. They point you toward the places you abandoned yourself. And as you bring light to them, your energy changes. You stop performing softness to be loved. You stop confusing self-sacrifice with virtue. You start to live with intention rather than reaction. He feels that change before you speak it. The same words now carry a different frequency. Your eyes no longer plead, they witness. Your body no longer bends, it anchors. And suddenly, the dynamic collapses. Because without your unconscious agreement, the old pattern cannot survive. He doesn't understand why he feels powerless, but that's the essence of awakening, it strips away the illusion of control. Men like him often try to return after you've awakened, drawn by the echo of what they once fed on. They sense the power but mistake it for invitation. Yet the awakened woman knows, not every soul is meant to travel beside her. Some were meant only to awaken her through their absence. So when he reaches back, when he says he misses you, what he truly misses is the version of himself that felt powerful in your presence. But that woman, the one who needed to be understood, who waited to be chosen, she no longer exists. What remains is the embodiment of stillness, the sacred energy of a woman who no longer looks for home in anyone but herself. And that is what he cannot replace. In the quiet after awakening, there is a strange kind of peace, the kind that comes not from comfort, but from clarity. It's the moment when the noise of the world fades, when your mind stops chasing why, and your heart simply accepts. This is the silence where truth lives. And it's here that you begin to see everything differently, him, yourself, and the story that once bound you. He still moves through the world as though you might return, still searching for your energy in faces that echo yours but never hold the same depth. That is the curse of losing a woman who has awakened. She becomes unforgettable, not because of what she gave, but because of what she revealed. You were not a chapter in his story, you were the mirror that exposed his illusion of control. He thought he wanted love, but what he really wanted was comfort. And you, in your rising awareness, became the opposite of that. You became truth. Carl Jung spoke of the tension between opposites, how growth requires the death of old polarities. The masculine and the feminine, light and shadow, control and surrender. Your awakening was the breaking point of that tension. You stopped existing as a projection of his ideal feminine, the sweet, docile, endlessly forgiving figure his ego adored. You became something the unconscious could no longer manipulate, whole. Wholeness, after all, is dangerous to those who thrive on imbalance. You learned that being whole doesn't mean being perfect. It means no longer abandoning yourself. It means holding both tenderness and strength without apology. It means being able to love deeply without clinging, and to let go without bitterness. That kind of woman unsettles the world because she cannot be possessed, not even by her own longing. And he felt it, the shift from need to knowing. The vibration of your absence was louder than any argument. He began to realize that your silence wasn't punishment, it was liberation. That what he thought was rejection was actually reflection, his own inability to meet you where you stood. The awakened feminine doesn't chase or persuade. She observes. She witnesses the unraveling of illusion with a stillness that feels divine. He mistook that stillness for indifference, but in truth, it was compassion, the kind born from wisdom. Because awakening teaches that every soul must face its own lessons. You cannot drag someone into their consciousness. You cannot awaken them by proximity. Love cannot save a man who clings to his unconscious self. Jung called this the tragedy of the unlived life, when a person refuses the call to evolve and instead remains imprisoned in repetition. You, on the other hand, accepted the call. You walked into your darkness and found not despair, but light. You began to see that every heartbreak was an initiation, each loss, a lesson in sovereignty. You learned that love is not a currency of worth but an expression of alignment. That true intimacy can only exist where both souls are awake. Anything less is dependency disguised as devotion. And so your energy changed. It softened, but not in the way it once did. This softness was no longer submission, it was serenity. You moved with a quiet confidence that required no validation. You smiled less, but when you did, it was from a place of knowing, not performing. You became the embodiment of what Jung called the self, the center that exists beyond persona, beyond masks, beyond fear. He sensed this transformation but could not name it. It unnerved him. The woman who once bent over backward to be understood now stood unshaken in silence. The woman who once asked for love now emanated it without attachment. It is the paradox of awakening. When you stop searching, everything begins to seek you. And yet, you no longer crave to be sought. You've seen too much of the world's illusions to chase recognition. You've touched something eternal, the part of you that existed before him, before any story. That is the feminine essence at its highest vibration, presence without possession. It is the energy of the moon, still, luminous, and untouchable. So he looks back and wonders what changed. He remembers your laughter, your patience, your warmth. But he cannot understand that the same love still lives within you, it's just no longer directed outward. It flows inward now, toward the parts of yourself you once neglected. That's what real awakening does, it redirects the current of love from dependency to self-realization. And though he may try to reach you again, you know better. You've learned that not everyone is meant to walk beside you once you've seen the truth. You've learned that closure is not something you get from others, but something you grant yourself when you stop needing an ending to feel complete. He didn't lose you because you changed, he lost you because you remembered. You remembered who you were before the world told you to be small. You remembered your worth was never something to be proven, only lived. And once that remembrance takes root, no man, no story, no ghost of the past can take it away. There comes a moment in every awakening when the woman no longer fights what is gone. She stops trying to rewrite the story and instead begins to understand its symbolism, the way the universe speaks in endings. That relationship was never a mistake, it was an initiation. He was not just a man, he was the archetype of your unconscious longing, the reflection of your forgotten worth. He came to show you where you had abandoned yourself. And once that lesson was complete, the connection had to dissolve. This is the point where pain turns into wisdom. At first, it feels like grief, the kind that sits heavy in the body, the kind that makes the nights long and the mornings hollow. But beneath that ache is something holy, rebirth. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That's what awakening demands, not comfort, not closure, but transformation. And so, slowly, you begin to rebuild, not your life, but your relationship with yourself. The same energy you once poured into him now begins to nourish your own spirit. You start to listen to your body again, to the quiet intuition that once whispered but was ignored. You learn to rest without guilt, to say no without fear, to walk away without needing to be understood. Every small boundary becomes a prayer, every act of self-respect a ritual of healing. You realize that you were never asking for too much, you were simply asking the wrong person. You were asking a man still ruled by his ego to meet you in your soul. You were asking an unconscious heart to understand an awakened one. And so you forgive yourself, not for loving him, but for believing that his inability to love you back meant you were unworthy. That was the old story, written in the language of survival. The new one is written in truth. The truth is this: a woman's awakening is not a punishment. It is the end of imitation love. It's the return to authenticity, to the kind of love that begins and ends within. When you no longer need validation, affection becomes pure. When you no longer fear loss, connection becomes sacred. You stop performing for love, and love begins to find you in its rawest, most honest form. The world, however, does not always welcome awakened women. Your serenity unsettles those who feed on chaos. Your clarity disrupts systems built on confusion. People may call you distant, detached, even cold. But that's because they've never met a woman who loves without losing herself. They mistake your boundaries for walls, your peace for pride. Let them. The awakened feminine does not explain herself, she simply embodies the truth until the world adjusts. He, too, will sense it. Even from miles away, your energy remains imprinted on his psyche. In his quiet moments, he will remember how your presence once felt like still water, how his chaos calmed in your silence. But he won't realize that what he missed was not your affection, but the sanctuary of your energy. And that sanctuary no longer exists for him, because it now belongs entirely to you. That is the final act of awakening, the reclamation of energy. What you gave away freely in the name of love, you now tend as sacred. You learn that not everyone deserves access to your softness, not everyone has earned the privilege of your empathy. You begin to understand the divine paradox of feminine energy: it heals, but it also destroys illusions. It creates, but it also transforms through endings. It is both womb and fire. In this awareness, you move differently. You no longer try to prove your worth by how much you endure. You measure your strength by how peacefully you walk away. You don't compete, chase, or explain, because your value is self-evident. You have become what Jung described as the individuated self, a soul integrated, whole, and no longer ruled by unconscious desire. And as this energy settles, the past begins to lose its weight. The memory of him becomes soft around the edges, not forgotten, but integrated. You stop asking what could have been, and start blessing what was. You understand that he was the catalyst, not the destination. He was the doorway that led you back to yourself. And perhaps that is the quiet mercy in all of this, that what once broke you became the path to awakening. That pain, when fully felt, becomes power. That letting go is not loss but liberation. So when he looks back and wonders why you no longer look the same, why your eyes no longer plead, why your silence feels so final, let him wonder. He will never truly understand that you did not become colder. You became clear. And clarity is something the unconscious cannot hold. There is a beauty in the stillness that follows awakening, not the dramatic kind, not loud or triumphant, but quiet, like dawn light touching the surface of water. It's the beauty of a woman who has returned to herself. The storm is over, not because she fought harder, but because she finally stopped fighting what was never hers to fix. This is where the transformation deepens. The awakened woman no longer seeks love as a means of completion, because she has seen what happens when love is sought from emptiness. She understands now that what she once called chemistry was often trauma's recognition, the echo of an old wound seeking itself in another. She begins to notice how attraction shifts when peace becomes her standard. The loud, chaotic kind of love that once drew her and now feels exhausting. The quiet, steady energy of truth is what her body craves. Jung said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. You were transformed, but he resisted. He wanted the reaction without the responsibility. He wanted the fire without the reflection. And that is why he lost you. You were not meant to be his forever, you were meant to awaken the part of him that still sleeps. Whether he chooses to rise or not is no longer your concern. You've entered the sacred phase of detachment, not indifference, but transcendence. Detachment means you can look at him without bitterness, remember without longing, and love without needing to return. It's not that you stopped caring, it's that your care no longer comes from a place of lack. You can wish him well and still walk away. You can honor what you had without reopening what has ended. That is mastery, the alchemy of the soul turning pain into peace. This peace, however, is not passive. It's alive. It's a quiet, pulsing awareness that expands with every breath. It's the understanding that love, in its purest form, is never about possession, it's about presence. And presence begins within. You now live in alignment with your energy rather than your fear. You say yes when your body opens, and no when it contracts. You no longer override your intuition in the name of being agreeable. The same voice you once silenced to keep him comfortable has become your compass. He might still call this change pride, rebellion, or arrogance. But that's because he confuses submission with virtue. In truth, you have simply stopped betraying yourself. You've realized that love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-abandonment. The awakened woman doesn't reject intimacy, she redefines it. Intimacy, to her, is not about merging into someone else's chaos, but about meeting in mutual awareness. It's no longer I need you, but I see you. And if he cannot meet her in that clarity, she walks away, not as punishment, but as preservation. The world around you begins to shift, too. You attract different conversations, different energies, different men. Those who approach you now sense that you are not impressed by surface charm. You no longer respond to potential, you respond to presence. You can feel authenticity in silence, and deception beneath the sweetest words. Your intuition, once muted by overthinking, now speaks like an oracle, precise, quiet, and certain. And here is where the feminine energy becomes divine. The awakened feminine doesn't seek to dominate or compete, she harmonizes. She doesn't need to prove that she is powerful, she embodies power through peace. Her strength is not in resistance but in resonance, the ability to remain soft without being swayed, to remain kind without being used. She no longer confuses being wanted with being valued. This energy, this equilibrium, is what Jung referred to as the union of opposites, the sacred marriage between the conscious and unconscious, the masculine and feminine within. It is the balance that gives birth to wholeness. You are no longer split between who you were and who you are becoming. The roles have fallen away, the pleaser, the fixer, the dreamer. What remains is essence, unfiltered, unmasked, free. He will feel it, though he may never understand it. Your detachment will haunt him more than your love ever did. Because awakening doesn't just remove you from his world, it dismantles the illusion of control he once held. The silence that follows will speak louder than any goodbye. It will whisper to his subconscious that he did not lose you to another man, but to your own becoming. And perhaps, one day, he will awaken too, when he realizes that your absence was the greatest teacher of all. But whether he does or not is irrelevant. Your story has already transcended his. You have become the mirror, the lesson, and the liberation. Now, when you look back, you no longer see a wound, you see a doorway. The doorway through which you stepped into yourself. You see that love was never meant to imprison you in longing, but to guide you home. You see that losing him was never the tragedy, it was the initiation into your own light. And now, in that light, you understand the final truth. A woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.